You're still a mess.
I don't know what's wrong with me.
Is about a 37-year-old wife who poisoned her 86-year-old billionaire husband to run with a young one. And on top of it all, she tried to use her charm on the detective working on the case to get him on her side. All this is in a 2017 crime mystery film called Crooked House, directed by Gillies Paquette-Brenner. Aristides was a very powerful, wealthy, controversial figure with powerful friends, not only in the UK, but also in the CIA that helped him expand his business in the United States. As they say, scratch my back, I scratch yours. But besides the powerful friends, he also had very powerful enemies. So she went to an old friend of hers and a private detective called Charles Hayward to help her figure out the case before the police got involved. At the beginning of this film, a woman who was not disclosed to us gave this injection to Aris Leon that claimed his life at the age of 86 years when Aris de Leon's was still young. He lost his first beloved wife, who was also the mother to his children, Philip Leonis and Roger Leonis, the youngest one. They were all living under the same roof with their families, meaning it was an extended family. And because of this, there would be some kind of ruthlessness amongst them since the old man had favorites as he preferred Roger to Philip among his sons and Sophia to the rest of his grandchildren. This caused some of the family members to hate him since he was also a very manipulative man that would get people to do things his way, whether they liked them or not. Leaning toward this ruthlessness, when Charles got to this mansion, he had to go through every family member. And here is the list: Lady Edith de Havilland, who is the sister to Aristides' first wife, Lady Marcia de Havilland. And when she died, Edith stayed behind to take care of the kids, Philip and George, including the grandchildren. Leonis, the oldest son, would spend his father's money to write his books that no one else read, along with his wife, Magda Leonis, who acted in movies that no one else watched. And the other thing was drinking as her hobby. And Magda had 3 children, Sophia de Havilland, who was the old man's favorite, useless Leonis, who loved rock and roll, besides hating the old man for making him do things he didn't want. And lastly, Josephine Leonis, the youngest of all people in the house, who besides hating the old man for stopping her from being a ballet dancer, would play detective within the house. Roger Leonides was the old man's favorite son, and because he had even given him one of his companies associated with catering, which always pissed off Phil because no matter what he always did, his father always chose his young brother. Roger lived with his wife, Clemency Leonide, who hated the fact that every time her husband failed in business ran to his father for help, like the night before his death, which kept them in the mansion she didn't want to be in. Then there was Brenda Leonides, the youngest wife of Aristide Leon, who everyone in the house believed to have killed the old man, including me, myself, and I will show you why. At the end of the video, there was also a young man called Lawrence Brown, who the old man chose strictly as the tutor for his grandchildren to also help him make his young wife Brenda happy in other matters that didn't involve money since he was too old for such matters. To cut the long story short, even though Brenda tried to use her charm on Charles to get him on her side, especially since the will was not signed, meaning she was the sole heir to all his, the evidence that was found showed that she was the one responsible, along with her young lover, Mr. Brown. So they got arrested after it was put in the newspapers that Aristides was dead. An old friend of his came with a new will, along with lawyers he used outside that showed that Sophia de Havilland was the sole heir to all his wealth, which again pissed off Phil because he was his eldest son, despite Sophia being his daughter. But then new evidence came up after Brenda and Mr. Brown were put in jail that showed that the little girl, Josephine Leon, did it because she hated the old man for not allowing her to do ballet. All this was in her diary, which she complained that went missing in Good Enough. It was only Lady Edith de Havilland who knew about it. Since Edith had a terminal disease that was going to claim her life in 6 months, she crushed her car with the little girl in it so that it does not come out. But Sophia and Charles did find out this movie was very tricky, and according to me, this is how I understood things. I believe Josephine's diary was switched by his teacher, Brown, since he had access to it, and for the maid's death the night Brenda was arrested. I think this was also planned before by Brenda and Brown to frame the young girl that she was responsible for claiming the life of his grandpapa, since Aristide's death would not easily just be overlooked, and I think that even though they were arrested before, they already had a plan planted in place, and here is. In the beginning of the film, this was the person who poisoned Aristides. It was a she with young hands with a marriage ring on her left hand. And even though it is very hard to tell who this person was, it was very obvious that it was not the young girl Josephine. The mansion had 4 wives in it. And despite that, they all always had their nails read. Apart from Lady Edith, here was the difference. I spotted after cranking up the brightness of these scenes, Magda Leon's marriage ring had no stone on it. It was just plain. The stone on Clemency Leon's ring was transparent and shining like a diamond. The same for Lady Edith's, but for Brenda Leonis, her ring had a black stone on it, the same as the person who poisoned Aristides had. The other thing is if you take a closer look at Brenda's hands, they look exactly like the murders, and though this is no strong evidence, the rings can tell who did it. The other thing was the hair. Whoever did it had red hair based on the reflections of light. And still, Brenda was the only one with red hair in the family. I have not forgotten Sophia since she was the main beneficiary at last, but she had no any sort of rings from when the film started to when it ended, though still it can be. Lesson from this film is not to quickly run to conclusions like Lady Edith did, claiming a life of an innocent soul. And if you have come this far, thanks for watching and consider subscribing.
Do you want to go on a date sometime?
What?
A date?
What are you on about?